I was raised in a family of architects. My father and uncle were practicing together as Hellmuth and Hellmuth. That started in 1911. Some of the decisions that he made shortly after 1911, when Uncle Harry came out to join him, because he was so busy he couldn't control it himself, were decisions that were, one might have suspected were the right decision, but from my observation of the family and what happened to our finances and all that sort of thing, indicated to me that they weren't the right decision and that something had to be done to figure out why they weren't. And I spent most of my young days buying shirts in Boyd's basement because Dad wasn't bringing home enough jobs to keep the office going to the point where it could achieve its economic potential. His decision was that he knew everybody in St. Louis, and everybody in St. Louis knew who George Hellmuth was. He was a damn good architect, and that they would seek him out and give him all the work he could do. And they would rather see him doing the work than meet him in a country club in the evening. They'd rather have their architect with his sleeves rolled up actually performing the service. So Dad resigned from all of his clubs and rolled his sleeves up and went to work. And the net result was over a period of years from, say, when I was conscious of it, probably around 1915 or so, his practice gradually ground down. And I don't have any precise figures, but I know that it wasn't nearly as broad and as active after that date at any time. And then the 30s, of course, it disappeared. So, having observed this, my mind set upon trying to discover a method that would avoid the problems that I saw my father having. It was very important not only to be able to do a job right, but it was equally important, if not more important, to be able to get the assignments. And I noticed that Father was left out of many political opportunities that he would describe it this way. He said the University of Missouri at Rolla had given him a pretty good job. He'd come home quite happily announced at the dinner table. And about a week later, he'd say, well, some damn politician got it away from him. I mean, this is the sort of thing. And then when they had the big plaza development in St. Louis, the American Institute of Architects apparently divided up the spoils, and Dad again was left out. The way I happened to become to select architecture as a profession or as an opportunity in school was that I was in the hospital in about 1920, I guess it was, just before going to college. And Uncle Harry and Dad visited me, and they asked me where I was going to, where I wanted to go to university and what I wanted to study. And I'd already decided that since their reputation was valuable and the name was pretty well established, that being the eldest son, I had to pick, so I thought I might just as well decide to be an architect. So without any other real reason than that, I went to school. Gabriel Ferrand, we used to call him the Archangel, the French professor, said that I would never regret taking a master's degree. And I had a bachelor's degree in architecture. And that he would give me a master's degree, pay my schooling for one, which is quite a compliment. So I dug in and spent the extra time to get my master's degree, which I have certainly never regretted. So I wound up with a bachelor's, a master's, and a diploma from the French government, which I got at Fontainebleau. And the main advantage to the diploma from the French government was that it gave me an ego situation. It balanced my natural inferiority complex in the presence of guys that had graduated from Princeton and Harvard and Yale and all that sort of thing. But Dad couldn't earn enough money to send me to those schools, so he had to go to Washington U, where it was, frankly, very inexpensive. An election came along at the time that Roosevelt was running and then the Depression was all blamed on the Republicans, and it just looked as though a change was obvious. So I joined the Democratic Party and helped elect Mayor Dickman, and I really helped. I made a poster of the mayor's face in white and black. You know, it was a very stark poster. I made the poster, but I got some friends of mine, and we put it up all over St. Louis in storefronts. And when Mayor Dickman was elected, he asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted a position in the architectural section. So he told me to go in and pick out anyone I wanted. So
you just carte blanche, go into
carte
City Hall?
blanche, go to City Hall and pick out what I wanted. And well, of course, I had a pretty good education, not much practical experience, but a good education, an excellent one. And so I went in and picked out a job as architect for the city of St. Louis, and not the prime architect, but sort of a secondary architect. And I had enough sense not in any way to disturb the existing organization. Osberg and Griselius, Osberg was the architect, Griselius was the engineer. But they let me do pretty well what I wanted to do, because I could have fired either of them. That's sort of a funny position to be in, but it's quite true. I don't know particularly why this went the way it did, but they decided that I needed some outside experience. And I thought Griselius was being plain mean to me to send me out in the field, out of the office. And I've later come to realize that was one of the biggest favors anybody ever did for me, because I been able to design buildings and follow them all the way through the construction phase in the field. And among those assignments was a set of stone privies for the parks.
What do you mean stone privies?
Well, there were stone toilet houses. You can go out in Forest Park, and I used to make the children tip their hats as they went by Daddy's toilet houses. In fact, a damn good-looking redhead one time, he asked me what those buildings were like, and I said, I like as many peas in a pod. And I didn't realize I'd made a pretty damn good pun. I'm not that, really not that bright, but anyhow, you look at these little stone buildings. I did something like 35 of them. They're still pretty good looking. I've looked at them in the last couple of days. But I complained to my professor of architecture at school. I said, look, Professor Hill, here I've got all this training, and all you give me are privies to do. He said, George, I don't give a damn if it's a doghouse. You do the best job you can, and you'll never regret it. I mean, just do what you can. So I did that, and but while in the city government and doing these privies, I got to know contractors in St. Louis. I got to know all the young politicians. I was a member of the Democratic political organization. And I got to know future mayors and the guys that control the city. All this comes into play later in my experience. So Father said that although he'd done pretty good sized office buildings, he did the Fur Company, the International Fur Exchange on the corner of Market and I guess Broadway. As an example, he did many office buildings downtown and churches and things of that sort. But he said that he was ashamed to tell me at that stage of the game that this was 1936 along in there, that he did not know how to practice architecture, and he didn't think anyone in St. Louis knew how. So he said, you go to some much larger center in St. Louis. I don't care if it's New York, Los Angeles, Boston, or wherever, Detroit, but get out of St. Louis because nobody here knows what they're doing. The first morning at work, I arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, bright and shiny. And the office obviously had been going like thunder for a long time before I got there. In Detroit, the offices started at 8 o'clock. It wasn't very long before I caught the attention of the top management of Smith & Grills. Mr. H.L. Walton was the then president of the firm. And I was jerked out of the drafting room and put into marketing. I apparently, this sounds funny to you guys, but in Detroit, many of the people, the talented men, are sort of up from the ranks. They're are different kinds of people in St. Louisans. They're trained differently. Their social life has been different, and to make it a long story, very very short, they just have absolutely no polish, and I could easily outclass these fellows in a social gathering, which was sort of a surprise to me. I hadn't expected that. And so I was put in the marketing area for this big company with a job of keeping 1,100 men busy. And so I told them that I needed a top-flight designer. And one day, George Nelson, who a lot of guys here will still know who George was. I think he died a few years ago, but he wound up designing furniture for Herman Miller, and he was one of the great designers of my era in any event. And he had worked with Yamasaki on some townhouses in New York, and he called up one day and he said, "George, I think I found the wonder boy you're looking for. There's only one trouble with him, he's a little bit Japanese." And the war, mind you, had just finished, and so Japanese weren't all that popular from that point of view. So I said, "To hell with that detail, let's send him out here. We'll put him to work. If he's as good as you say he is, I know we'll want him." And Yama at that time was working for Harrison and Abramovich. And Yama was something I'd never seen before, a designer of this caliber. And history has proven that he was a pretty damn great man. In 1944, I wrote a document which sort of put down on paper, what I had learned from all these men that were trying to help me, help them. And that was a document about public relations, and it gave maxims on how to get business, how to get beyond your own office. It was clear that in order to get a feel, there are two good ways to do it. There may be others, but there are two good ways. One is to have a client like General Motors who does work all over the world, and they will take you all over the world if you do a good enough job for them. And the other way to do it was to get a specialty that was not competitive in foreign markets. So on one of my trips trying to get work for Smithers and Grills, I was down in St. Louis. And this, mind you, was almost 10 years after I had left the City Hall. I noticed that my friends were running St. Louis. I mean, they were in charge of it. One of them was a mayor, and they were the head of the different departments, were all guys that I'd grown up with. And I found out that my connections were just about as good then as they were at any point, maybe even better. And so I asked him for a little some project to take back to Detroit. And I said, "George, look, we're not going to give you anything to take out of St. Louis. But if you want to do it yourself, that's a different matter." Anyhow, I told Joe Lineweber, who had employed me up there, and he was a very knowledgeable architect at Lineweber. Very, very knowledgeable, and very decent fellow. You just couldn't find a finer man. And Joe said, "Hell, George, take that work. Take it. I'll help you do it." But in any event, Yama did agree to join us. We cooked up Hellmuth, Yamasaki, and Lineweber in a bar near Smithers and Grill's office. A few days after Joe had said, I'll help you do it. And the next damn thing we knew, we had Missouri 1-3. It was a housing project, 13 buildings, worth at that time maybe $7 million. Today it might be 30 or 40 million. Yama came back with the general scheme for the St. Louis Air Terminal. And that scheme was good enough to be very exciting, and everybody liked it. And I think one of the reasons they liked this, even old women liked it, was that actually the roof of that building is only about 4 inches thick. And that's the unusual part about it. But it's really a Roman bath, the roof of a Roman bath, done with maybe a little bit cleaner lines. Yama knew a lot of things that that I learned, and I learned these things from Yama. That to get publicity, you employ a really great photographer. You don't mess around. But that building was under construction, and Fortune was doing a story of so what this guy did was photograph it as silhouetted against the sunset, which showed the structural form, and it was a great big picture in Fortune magazine. Well, in any event, one day Yamasaki came down to St. Louis, and he said that Yama was rather a frail person physically, and he said that it was too much for him to commute back and forth from Detroit to St. Louis. He said, "Damn it, Hellmuth, the mayor's died. Your contacts are all gone." He said, "You're a pretty good marketer, I'll admit that. And if you want to come to Detroit and work for me, why, okay." I said, "Well, you just go straight to hell," and slammed my hand on the table to emphasize the direction I wanted him to go in. And we terminated our partnership in that instant, our corporation. And at that moment, it turned out, again, a fortuitous circumstance, the Detroit office, which we had a Detroit office, was twice as profitable at that moment as the St. Louis office. So I wound up with the entire St. Louis office. And Joe Landweber and Yamasaki took the Detroit office. So here was George Hellmuth with the entire office in St. Louis with quite a bit of work in it. I was scared to death that we would lose some of our contracts when we lost Yamasaki. But by some negotiations and doing this thing properly, evidently the right way, and again by fortuitous circumstances, we didn't lose a single job. We didn't lose one. And Obata had been sort of Yamasaki's understudy, and Kassabaum had been Landweber's understudy. And they were stationed permanently in St. Louis. The other two guys were most of the time in Detroit. Obata has a phenomenal ability to take an enormously complex opportunity, I call them, not problems, but opportunities, and simplify it and solve it. And this has stood us in good stead. In other words, the work he did at Squibb was excellent. And if it hadn't been excellent, we wouldn't have gotten these other jobs. So you need two things: what I produced and he had the right men on the job, so they do it well and then follow up and keep people happy. Now, so this cleavage in the firm, which I thought might have been disastrous, turned out not to be at all. And so I gave Obata 25% of the firm and gave Kassabaum 25% of the firm and kept 50% for myself so that I wouldn't be kicked around again too fast. I knew I'd get it someday, but. And that was all right for a while, but a little bit down the road, they got the idea that they should be equal partners, one-third, one-third. Well, I couldn't see much harm in that, so I agreed to do that in 10 years. I was in a pickle. I was over in Illinois one time after some schoolwork, and one of the guys, I invited him over to St. Louis, and he opened his pocket with his hand and said, "Drop $500 in there." And I said, "Oh, I haven't got that much money with me." And so I went immediately to Hatton and said, "Now, how the hell do you handle this thing? I don't know if these guys are hoods or what they are. I don't want to insult them. I mean, you could be dangerous." I never had that kind of an approach before. I knew one thing for damn sure, that was we're going to have no part of it. So anyhow, that you say, why do you need a lawyer? I think any professional organization needs the advice of a very good lawyer at all times. And we found Paul Watson and employed him. And I'm sure we're very happy we did. Paul has been a fixture at HOK for God knows how many years, and he's done a wonderful job. But Kaufman said, "George, there's a job in Washington for a major to replacement of Alcatraz, and it's a prison job." And he says, "You better go up and get it." And I said to myself, I never did a prison. I don't know anything about prisons. It sounds very unpleasant. Why worry with that one? Well, Kaufman came back again. He said, threw a point on that job. He said, George, there's a big job there in Washington, a big prison job. Go get it. Again, I said, well, what the hell do I know about a prison? So on the third try, I thought, well, George, maybe you better go up there and take a look. So I went to Washington and met the head of the Bureau of Prisons and met their prison architect, a big fat fellow by the name of Kelly. So I said, Kelly, who are the outstanding prison designers in the world, perhaps? Well, he said, I can name about 6 of them, which is a proper procedure, but my tuned ear caught Adderhold a little bit louder than anybody else. So I hired Adderhold to join hands with us. Adderhold was an individual prison architect, very skilled and very pleasant guy. And that result was we got the new Alcatraz. And one of the reasons we got Alcatraz, the new Alcatraz Marion, the maximum security prison, was the then head of prisons had a theory that environment could have some effect even on the most hardened criminal. And St. Louis Priory Chapel, he thought was one of the most beautiful buildings he'd ever seen, which Gio had designed. And he felt that anybody who could design that building could put some charm on it, even in a prison that would work favorably on the attitudes of men who might be incarcerated there. Getting back to the University of Riyadh, I have a very dear friend that he and I were in horse cavalry together in 1928. And he stayed in the service and went into the tank corps, and when the war was over, he stayed in Germany. He became a Germanophile, although he's an Irishman. But he said, George, if you ever get any work or think of doing any work in the Middle East, you better get acquainted with my prospective son-in-law. He said, my very pretty daughter is engaged to marry a guy by the name of Eddie, and I'll be glad to introduce you to him. So I went to Lebanon, met Eddie, and studied with Eddie for maybe 6 months on Arab mentality, how an Arab thinks, how he acts, all the different things that would appeal to an Arab vis-a-vis a Westerner. And Eddie explained many things, that Arabs work with families, they like green, and a lot of little tiny things that are very minor, but when your chips are down, what makes the difference? Maybe some of these little tiny things make the difference. Well, anyway, I arrived in Riyadh, scared to death in October 1975, I guess, 74, I think it was. Al-Fatah probably gave me 5 minutes, maybe 10. And I flashed a book in front of him, a publicity-type brochure, which had Fortune, Life, all the beautiful magazines, and it was an impressive brochure. And I said to him that, there's not much reward anyone can get for awarding a job to anyone, except a good job. And if I ever had this job to award, I'd pick an architect who will have a conscience, not give it to a big, nameless corporation or who has no feeling of any kind or any real responsible feeling for what he's doing. I'd pick an architect, put him in charge, and you'll get the best you can get. Well, it wasn't more than a month later than we got a telex saying that so many people, 18 firms have been pre-qualified to submit qualifications in detail for this project. And that they were headed by 3 different architects. One's name was George Hellmuth. One's name was Kenyo Tange, the principal architect of Japan. The other was a fellow named Karl Schwanzer of Austria, who had been a professor that taught most of these Arabs whatever they knew about architecture. And this guy had followed my procedure exactly. Anyhow, we got the best people in the world, and they're all English speaking. And then the presentation was made very, very carefully. We developed a book. It was bound in green Morocco leather, and it was beautifully done in duplicate. And it was a work of art done by Chip Ray. And the whole thing was just elegant. And they were made in specially tailored suitcases that the books fit into. So I visualize when these books were on a table, maybe there were 200 proposals. It seems to me it made common sense that something like this would be noticeable. Oh, of course, you know, we got the assignment, and it was one hell of an assignment, and one of the biggest, probably the biggest job that was ever left in the history of the world. It was one job. During the presentation, the lights went out and our slide thing had to stop, which was unusual in Riyadh. They were in an electrical system, was rather primitive. And my son George, because we were told that the Arabs like to work with families, got up and talked for at least 2 hours and did a damn good job. One thing that spoiled a little of the pleasure of getting this job was that when we were awarded the contract, Schwanzer killed himself. And he had the original study to the university project, and I'm afraid that he had spent most of the fee in an effort to get the real job, you know. And so it was pretty sad. That was one of the sad things that happened. I can remember when some of this war work stopped, the guys came in and said, "Gee, George, we're out of business. We're running out of business. It's clearly going to stop. Get me some work." Well, there's no way in God's world you could get work in a hurry. I mean, on command. Nobody can get it. You've got to buy the field, cultivate it, plant your seed, tend it, and then go out and pick it, all of which takes years. So that's a sort of a description of the way I like to describe things, but that's very true in architectural practice. So if people aren't tending the fields in new business, there's no way in the world you're going to go out and pick a crop, because there's no crop there to pick. That's sort of a divergence, but I realized that getting a job was a very exciting experience. And I like to drag the job in and throw it on the floor and then walk on. And what I did was assemble the people to do the job. Now, a lot of people don't realize, think that Hellmuth is a salesman. Well, Hellmuth is maybe a salesman, but he also is an assembler of men who are capable of doing first-class work. Think that one over. Anyhow, I don't know where to inject this, but my professional life has been fraught with coincidences that are almost beyond belief. You know, a lot of them, they become more and more apparent as life has gone on. And what the source of these coincidences is pretty hard to describe. But I do admit that with some pride that very early in the game, I went down to the old cathedral and got on my knees and asked for some help. And I'm not all sure I didn't get a lot of help. The people, the church say that you a little pray and you get some help. It may sound silly to some people, but I tell you that I've gotten help that's almost beyond belief, and it makes me wonder, really.